Here comes a new challenger!
Hey, Frog Prince Rana here, and thank you for dropping by. In this video, we will revisit an old foe of this channel. I'm talking about Imran Hussein. If you haven't come across this character before, let me give you a quick recap. Well, in summary, according to Imran, us atheist or agnostic cannot possibly be moral, as apparently we need a sky daddy and a man-made book containing many horrific stories to be our moral guideline. In an attempt to sound smart, Imran would often use words like objective and subjective morality. Not to mention strawman our position on why we become a non-believer. Trust me, he addresses everything else except the simple fact that most of us do not believe because, well, not being true. But obviously that is not a point any religious person would want to address. On my earlier response videos to Imran, I explained even if we think of our individual actions in terms of objective and subjective morality, well, it does fit both definitions. But who cares about that, right? It is much easier to bullshit about it. In case you are interested, those videos are linked in description. What irks me most is when Imran basically besmirches Richard Dawkins with either straight up lying or by misleading. I'll be honest, I like Dawkins. I enjoy reading his books and love the fact that some of his books are easy enough for general people to understand. I will be commenting on Imran's video, Don't Be Impressed by Atheism, Richard Dawkins ka tazadat, with, well, a thumbnail that got the attention it curved. And thus, here we are. Now, my grasp on human language is laughably bad. As far as I'm concerned, I'm the least articulate person with the most horrible accent. As Imran's video is almost entirely in Urdu, there were a couple of words I was not sure about. Well, Google is my friend. One thing I do have to mention though, I never thought I would agree with Imran on anything, and it just goes to show that even a broken clock can be right twice a day. So what does Imran has to say? The title translates to Don't Be Impressed by Atheism, Richard Dawkins' Contradiction. Well, we are human, and thus I'm sure at times we can contradict ourselves, as life is not simply black and white, but various shades of grey. Anyway, a rough translation of Imran's video would be following. Sometimes online we watch some atheist videos, such as Richard Dawkins, and we're impressed, and at times scared. We feel like our day, morality, life has ended. That happens because we are impressed to some without any real reason, especially the Western type academics. We see they are from the West, from UK, from America, wearing a suit and a tie, with unparalleled English. On top of that, they have a PhD. After seeing all that, even if we understand or not, we agree to it. And we get scared. We need to get rid of these complexes. For example, if Richard Dawkins was not Dawkins, but an Asian dude called Raju Dash, would we be just as impressed? Think about it. We have to deal with that part of ourselves first, and then we need to focus on what they're actually saying and not on the person. This is why at times I would say that if you're even remotely impressed by any Dawkins video, do one thing. Rewatch it, and this time, don't look at his face, but listen to what he has to say. And once you focus on the actual content, you will notice how many contradictions are there, including many silly statements. For example, he released a book titled Outgrowing God. Recently, Joe Rogan invited Dawkins to his podcast regarding morality. In that, Dawkins attacks Islam and talks about morality in Islam to be vile. He was talking in such a way that he is in a higher pedestal when it comes to morality, as if he has some objective ground being an atheist. When Joe asked, "How do we understand morality without God?" Dawkins replied, "There is something in the air, and we get our morality from that." Further explanation being, throughout history, various thinkers, philosophers, poets had various conversations that gets in the air and we pick it from there. From that we understand, at best, according to Dawkins, morality in atheism is subjective at best. There is no objective or solid foundation for differentiating between good and bad. Then how can this person, based on this idea, can call Islam bad with such confidence, as it is all subjective? Well, that's basically it. Now, please say that you're just as confused as me, and I'm not the only one. I do agree with the idea that often we would get impressed with the presentation. That is human nature, and not completely unwarranted. A well thought out and well presented argument would hold more water than the same argument presented in a rambling fashion. Then again, it is important to understand the substance. So up to that part, we're in agreement. Now a lesser me would point out that Imran does use Arabic quotes in his videos. And I'm rather impressed with that. What the heck, I'm a lesser me. So Imran, when you use those surahs, exactly what are you trying to achieve? If I remember correctly, as a joke, on one of my response video, I recited something from ancient Sanskrit. Well, actually it was more a dig than a joke. And I was highlighting that the point was just to come across as, well, knowledgeable, for a lack of better word. I wish I could do that in Latin. Back to Imran's point. Full disclosure, I do have Dawkins' Outgrowing God, a beginner's guide, but I haven't had time to read through it yet. I love books, but I do miss Control F. I had to skim through the chapters and look at index under morality. But it is entirely possible that I have missed the so-called contradiction Imran is referring to. All the three Abrahamic religions, Christians, Muslims and Jews, do share a lot of stories. Dawkins mostly covered Christianity. At times, he would point out the same stories in Islam. He rightly points out how wrong those thinkings are. Obviously, Imran is wrapped up in his knickers, and instead of actually addressing any of the issues, Imran thinks he can brainwash or mislead his audience by quote-unquote make Dawkins not so clever with his in-the-air example. Well, instead of me putting words in Dawkins' mouth, I rather read part of what he has to say and have you come to your own conclusion. And I hope you will come to that from an honest angle, regardless what religious or non-religious group you might belong to. Earlier in the chapter, Dawkins talks about one of the most upsetting stories in these religions. That is when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. This whole story in Genesis chapter 22. The same story is told in the Quran 37:99-111, where the name of the son is not mentioned, and there is a tradition in Islam that it is Abraham's other son, Ismail. Many Christians still take the Bible literally as historical fact. As we shall see in chapter 5, they think it's impossible to be good, impossible even to know what good means without God. In both these stories, God testing Abraham and God testing Job, I can't help feeling that the God character is not only cruel, but well, insecure. It's as though God is like a jealous wife in a novel who is so uncertain of her husband's fidelity that she deliberately tries to trap him in unfaithfulness, pursues an attractive woman friend, perhaps to tempt him, just to prove to herself that he will remain loyal to her. And if God is supposed to know everything, you might think he would know in advance how Abraham would behave when put to the test. If you ask Christians today why they think their religion is a force for good, they will very often cite the 10 Commandments. But when I have asked them what the 10 Commandments actually are, I find they often can remember only one: Thou shalt not kill. I would say that's a pretty obvious rule for a good life. A rule that should hardly need to be carved in stone. But as we shall see in chapter 5, it turns out to have meant only, "Thou shalt not kill members of thy own tribe." God had no problem with killing foreigners. As we'll see later in the chapter, the God of the Old Testament was continually urging his chosen people to slaughter other tribes, and with a bloodthirsty ruthlessness it's hard to find in any other work of fiction. But in any case, "Thou shalt not kill" doesn't have pride of place among the 10 commandments. Various traditions differ a little in how they order the commandments, but they all give prominence to number 1. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Jealous again. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is wrathful. Nahum 1:2. Do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Like all other animals, we humans are the product of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Brains evolved like all other parts of the body, and that means that what we do, what we like doing, what feels right or wrong, also evolve. We inherit from our ancestors a lifting for sweet things and a yuck reason to the smell of decay. We inherit evolved sexual desire. All those are easy to understand. In moderation, sugar is good for us, although too much is not. We now live in a world where too much sugar is readily available. But this was not true of our wild ancestors on the African savanna. Fruit was good for them, and many fruits contain moderate amounts of sugar. It was impossible to get too much sugar, so we evolved an open-ended appetite for it. The smell of decay is associated with dangerous bacteria. It benefited our ancestors to avoid decaying meat, and that included a revulsion to the smell. It's obvious why we evolved a desire for the opposite sex. Sexual desire leads to babies, and those babies then carry the genes that give them sexual desires when they grow up. We are all descended from an unbroken line of ancestors who mated with a member of the opposite sex, and we have inherited their desire to do so. But now for something less easy to understand. We seem also to have inherited a desire to be nice to other people, to be friends with them, spend time with them, cooperate with them, sympathize when they are in distress, help them when they are down. The evolutionary reason to be nice is hard to explain and must wait until chapter 11 after the chapters on evolution itself. Meanwhile, I can only ask you to accept this niceness. A special limited kind is part of our evolutionary heritage, like sexual desire, and it probably feeds into our sense of right and wrong. We have evolved moral values, inherited from our remote ancestors, and yet that can only be a part of the answer to the question that heads this chapter. This must be so, if only because our view of right and wrong changes as the centuries go by, and changes on a historical timescale much too fast to represent evolutionary change. You can see it as the decades go by. It's almost like something in the air. Of course, it isn't literally in the air. It's a combination of lots of things. So it sort of feels like in the air because it can't be pinned down to any one place. The dominant moral values of the 21st century in which we are now living are noticeably different from those of even 100 years ago. They are even more different from those that prevailed in the 18th century. Then, keeping slaves was simply what people did, including my ancestors in Jamaica. I'm sorry to say, and they thought, civilizations would collapse if the slaves were freed. The great Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States and the main author of the US Constitution, kept slaves. So did George Washington, the first president. Let's at least hope they and my ancestors didn't know the appalling conditions in the ship that transported the slaves from West Africa. By the way, it wasn't just white Europeans and Americans who took slaves from Africa. While Europeans were taking slaves from West Africa, Arabs were taking them from East Africa Swahili, which has become the dominant language of equatorial East Africa, developed as a language of the Arab slave trade. It contains many words of Arabic origin. African chiefs also kept slaves themselves, as well as capturing and selling them to European and Arab traders. President Lincoln said this in 1858. "I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race." Truly, whatever was in the air in the 19th century, something very different hovers about us today. It's a poor historian who would condemn Lincoln and Darwin and Huxley as racist. They were as near to being non-racist as men of their time ever got. They were men of the 19th century. If they had been born 2 centuries later, they would have been horrified by those two quotations. You don't even have to wait 1 century to notice a change in moral values. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to understand what Dawkins is saying, and I can't see any reason not to agree with any of it. As I have covered subjective versus objective morality in earlier videos, I will skip it here. But if any of you viewers know what the contradiction is, please let me know. This is where I'll end this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I do hope it sheds some light in the air. If you thought as much, please leave a like, comment, and share it around. If you already haven't, please consider subscribing, as it would help me bring more contents to you and is very much appreciated. Thank you once again. Wherever you are, have a safe day. Signing off.
Like you, we are one tribe.